In the suburb of Oak Haven, nestled snugly between untamed wilderness and peaceful human settlements, a tacit equilibrium had long reigned. But when the laws of wildlife are suddenly broken, the struggle for existence turns into a desperate drama. Lily Thompson, who always saw her mission in caring for lost or stray creatures living near her home, had no idea how fateful her encounter with Daisy, a pregnant Palace's cat, willing to trust her in her most vulnerable state, would be. Daisy carried not only her own life, but also the responsibility for her future kittens. However, nature, capable of being merciful, sometimes shows a ruthless face. On the edge of the pine grove lurked an unknown predator, a creature foreign to these parts. When that fateful day arrived and their paths crossed, it was no longer a question of who was dominant in the habitat, but of the very right to live. Will wild nature intervene and prevail, or will unexpected unity still influence the usual course of events? This is a story of courage, of survival, and of the inextricable connection of people, which unites both primeval wilderness and humanity in one heart. Beneath the slow rays of the afternoon sun, quiet Oak Haven was slowly sinking into a state of evening reverie. This area, belonging to the outskirts of Jacksonville, Florida, was characterized by dense pine thickets and neat lawns. It was there that Lily Thompson, a hospice nurse who spent her summer months caring for the afflicted, had lived for the past decade. Her small ranch-style house, with a wooden porch running around the building, as well as a perfect garden, had become a kind of haven for all the local wild inhabitants. Lily's colleagues often joked that the backyard of her house had long become an unofficial animal rescue center that she curated almost single-handedly. Every morning, in Bonnie Ridge, Lily put out bowls of food for the surrounding creatures. Cats, dogs, and even cows wandering nearby had become accustomed to her kindness. But one day, in early March, Lily noticed an unexpected guest, a pregnant Palace's cat. Unlike other stray animals, she looked majestic. She walked confidently, like a truly wild creature that had found itself on the edge of human habitation. Her coat was thick, with grayish-white tones and dark markings, and her neat figure, albeit with a rounded belly, revealed a predatory, hardy nature. Knowing from experience that you shouldn't get too close to a wild animal, Lily began leaving containers of fresh water and portions of raw chicken meat near her pines. She christened the area where suburban development converged with the forest sanctuary and was glad if Daisy accepted her gifts. "Glad to see you, sweet girl," Lily whispered, standing on the porch and watching the Palace's cat cautiously sniff her way to the containers. "Just keep your distance and we'll get along just fine," she added mentally. Across the quiet street lived Luke Martinez, who had already turned 45. He was a former military pilot who decided to retire after the death of his son, James, in a car accident. The tragedy deprived him not only of his child, but also ruined his family life. Luke's only consolation was Max, a 4-year-old German shepherd whom he loved with all his soul. However, unlike Lily's flourishing garden, his own yard was in some disarray. The grass had grown quite wild. Luke now worked as an aviation simulator instructor at a private aviation firm and tried to leave the yard only when it wasn't crowded. He would go for a walk with Max during the most deserted hours. From the window of his house, which also served as his work office, he sometimes noticed Lily's morning chores, how she laid out food, and nearby, among the pines, that very Palace's cat was hiding. The presence of a wild beast worried him. In an already fragile world, it could become a problem. "Keep your distance, Max," Luke never tired of repeating when he and the dog went for a walk before dawn and noticed Daisy. Max, although curious, knew how to listen to his master thanks to regular training. With the arrival of mid-March, Lily noticed that Daisy began to appear more often. Sometimes she showed up 2 or 3 times a day, and during the hours of scorching sun, she rested under the shade of the huge pines near the house. Her movements had slowed down somewhat, and Lily realized that the time of birth was very close. She shared her concerns during lunch break with a colleague at the hospice. "Sarah, I'm worried about her. Wild animals usually try to avoid people, especially when they're expecting offspring." Sarah, stirring her coffee, suggested, "Daisy probably feels safe near you. After all, animals have a special intuition that neither you nor other people have." Daisy, of course, didn't know that another inhabitant had settled in the vicinity. A huge Burmese python, most likely escaped or released by a careless owner. In Florida, such snakes were becoming a real disaster, although they were less common in the northern regions. This python could reach almost 15 feet in length, and, thanks to its activity, it remained flexible and posed a serious danger. One warm Saturday, closer to the end of March, something happened that no one expected. Lily returned from her morning shift and was just going to inspect this sanctuary when she heard frightening sounds on the outskirts of the site. Unknown howls mixed with rustling vegetation made her heart clench. Turning the corner, she saw this very python wrapped around Daisy like a tight, deadly noose. The pregnant Palace's cat was resisting with all her might, but her vulnerability was obvious. "Oh God, no!" Lily exclaimed, and her desperate voice broke the midday silence. From shock, she couldn't figure out how to help. All her medical training seemed powerless in the face of this terrifying sight. At the same moment, Max began to bark, and Luke inside his house, at the computer where he was conducting a remote class, immediately caught the change in the dog's intonation. The barking sounded insistent, almost alarming, and Luke quickly turned off the microphone. "Sorry, I need to check something," he told the student and hurried to the door. He had already learned to distinguish every tone of Max's barking and understood something was happening. As soon as Luke ran out into the street, the phone vibrated in his pocket. Lily was calling. Although they weren't close acquaintances, they had exchanged numbers at a neighborhood watch meeting once. And as soon as Luke heard in Lily's voice that very anxiety that awakened his military instinct, he headed to her house without hesitation, and Max ran alongside. The picture they found was shocking. Daisy could barely move, and the python continued to tighten its rings around the exhausted Palace's cat. Lily stood nearby, in tears, but didn't dare to approach. Luke was used to dangerous situations and quickly assessed the situation. The snake was busy defeating Daisy once and for all. "Max, freeze," he commanded, and the German shepherd immediately froze in place, although her tense body indicated readiness to pounce. Trying to find at least some kind of improvised means, Luke noticed a broken branch about 4 feet long under a pine tree. "Hang in there," Luke shouted in a firm voice, looking at Lily. "When I give the signal, you'll need to free the Palace's cat. Can you do it?" She nodded, wiping away tears. Luke carefully approached the python, holding the branch firmly in his hand, and ordered Max to bark loudly to distract the snake's attention. Annoyed, the python turned its head slightly towards the new threat, and that moment was enough for Luke to drive the branch between the elastic rings in Daisy's body, loosening the grip. Lily, seizing the moment, ran up and gently pulled the Palace's cat by the front paws. Daisy broke free from the python's embrace and, making a faint hiss, fell to her side, breathing heavily. Feeling that the victim had slipped away, the snake retreated and, like a swaying nightmare, slithered into the thickets. Hearts were beating as if they were about to jump out of chests. Daisy, having freed herself, collapsed wearily nearby, gasping for breath, but seemed alive and conscious. Luke glanced at her rounded belly. It seemed that childbirth would begin soon, and the bruises received could complicate the situation. "I have an empty garage, and it has climate control. We could make a safe place for her," Luke suggested suddenly, surprised at his own words. But, seeing gratitude in Lily's gaze, he realized that he wasn't going to give up his idea. Thus began their improvised rescue operation. Luke brought a spacious cage from the garage, and Lily called a veterinarian friend from the hospital who specialized in wildlife, Dr. Maria Rodriguez. Within an hour, she managed to get to the scene and examine the frightened Palace's cat. Fortunately, Daisy got away with only severe bruises and nervous strain, but the python attack spurred premature birth. "The best we can do is provide her with a quiet and safe place and monitor her condition," Dr. Rodriguez explained, setting up a small shelter in the garage. With the help of screens and blankets, she managed to create a kind of ward. They put a container of water there and spread soft bedding. Lily and Luke installed a baby monitor with a camera to watch Daisy, trying not to bother her unnecessarily. Evening came. Lily and Luke settled on the porch of his house, waiting together for signs of contractions. Max settled at their feet, either out of habit or out of concern, looking towards the garage. I haven't had such military training in many years, Luke said quietly, breaking the meditative silence that had settled around them. Lily turned her head to him, and the light of the sunset softened his face, showing suffering, but also a hint of inner warmth. I'm glad you were here, she admitted. I couldn't have helped her alone, Lily added after a pause. Luke nodded and, lowering his gaze, touched Max's head. James loved this dog so much that sometimes it's hard for me to even look at Max without seeing my son's face. In response, Lily gently squeezed his hand. Grief makes us build walls, she whispered, but life still finds ways to break through them. Then the baby monitor came to life with a thin signal. Daisy had started giving birth. The next 12 hours flew by intense anticipation and reverent delight. According to Dr. Rodriguez's instructions, they only watched the process on the screen without disturbing Daisy's peace. And so she gave birth to 5 wonderful Palace's cat kittens. The little creatures curled up in fluffy balls, clinging to their mother. Dr. Rodriguez stated that the birth had passed without serious complications, but the next 48 hours would be decisive. These 2 days imperceptibly flowed into a whole week. During this time, Luke and Lily took care of the family together, learning to trust each other and the wild Mother Palace's cat. Gradually, Luke began to talk about memories associated with James and realized that he still had a need to share his pain. Lily also opened up, telling about the difficult experience of caring for her dying mother. This prompted her to choose a career as a hospice nurse. The kittens, meanwhile, were growing. When they began to crawl a little, each began to show a special character. The most curious was Christened Scout. He was always the first to climb out of the improvised nest. The smallest was named Pip, and 2 sisters were nicknamed Luna and Star for their activity at night. The 5th kitten, the most neat and sedate, received the nickname Sage. When the babies gained strength, Dr. Rodriguez began to think about a plan to return them to the wild. They're wild animals, she reminded Luke and Lily, and the best we can do is keep them safe away from residential areas. Over the next few weeks, she contacted a nature reserve north of Jacksonville, in Michigan. There were vast protected areas there, ideal for Palace's cats. By the end of April, everything was prepared for transportation, and the day came when Daisy and her offspring were loaded into special carriers. The reserve staff chose a deserted and picturesque place by a stream where the Palace's cats could live as they were meant to. Luke and Lily watched as the rangers opened the carriers. The kittens jumped out happily, and their fluffy fur seemed to merge with the rays of the morning sun. Daisy cautiously looked out after them, looked around the new territory, and for a few seconds fixed her gaze on the people who had helped her in the most critical moment. Then she disappeared into the depths of the undergrowth, following the kittens, and only the rare rustle of grass reminded of her presence. Luke quietly took Lily's hand. "Thank you," he said, "for calling me that day, for helping me remember how important it is to take care of each other." "It's okay," Lily whispered, squeezing his hand. "How much had changed in these few weeks? I, in turn, am grateful that you were there when I needed support." In the following months, Luke's garage was filled with familiar things again, but the trace of the presence of the Palace's cats remained palpable in the details. Together with Lily, he set up convenient shelters for wild animals on his site, and his neglected lawn was transformed. Max seemed to be enjoying life even more, now walking in the company of 2 friends at once. And the python itself, which once frightened the entire district, was later caught by the Protection Service and also sent to a specialized reserve. After all, the appearance of such a large and alien beast awakened rapid changes in both people and nature. Once at sunset, when the light gilded the tops of the pines, Lily and Luke sat on the porch and lazily watched the day fade. They had recently returned from a trip to the reserve. The rangers reported that they occasionally saw Daisy and her grown-up kittens in those parts, who apparently were very comfortable there. Luke gently hugged Lily with one hand and quietly said, "Sometimes fate really needs an unexpected push to bring the right people together at the right time. And who would have thought that it would take a pregnant Palace's cat and a Burmese python for this?" He smiled, watching Max, putting his muzzle on his paws, looking at the quiet yard. "And do you remember that song that was called This Evening?" It was she, according to local legends, that flew through the pine thickets and connected everyone on that very edge of suburban life. Since then, Lily continued to care for her tailed neighbors, but no longer alone. In Luke's garage, a workplace was now equipped to create feeders and shelters, which they gave to other residents of Oak Haven. And the baby monitor that was used to watch Daisy took a special place on the shelf next to the photos. Among the pictures of Daisy and her kittens were now also photos in which the smiling James was next to little Max. These shots no longer caused unbearable pain. They became a symbol of acceptance, love, and a common path. Sometimes, wandering together along the edge of the pine forest and listening to the quiet wind, Lily and Luke remembered that tense day when life, contrary to circumstances, connected them. They no longer came across the python, but sometimes in the twilight, they noticed the silhouette of a palace's cat in the distance. Perhaps it was Daisy herself, or maybe one of her strong kittens. And every time a smile lit up on their faces, like a quiet reminder that healing sometimes comes from the most unexpected sources, that courage manifests itself in times of danger, and that genuine support is born only when people decide to help each other and wildlife not separately, but together.